Today on the show is a very special guest. He's the Managing Director of SRL Diagnostics. In fact, health has a very good correlation with the per capita GDP growth rate, and that is something we will be discussing in detail on the show today. Indeed, a wonderful tea off, Dr. Chaudhary. Welcome to Tea Time today.
How are you, Cheti?
Very well. In fact, looks like you've been tested positive to be a great golf player in your sports gene test with the kind of tee off we just saw. So take us through this sports gene test that you were talking to me about.
Cheti, sports gene test is a very important diagnostic test for anyone who aspires to be a professional sports person.
Right.
The test was found out coincidentally when they found that the black athletes in every competitive athletic event did better than the others. So when they did the gene profiling of some of the very successful athletes, it was found that there is a gene called ACTN3, which is what is called the sports gene, which exists in 3 variants. The good thing is it exists in every human being.
Really?
Whoever is born has no reason not to play. This particular gene has 3 expressions. One is that you are made up for power sports, the sports that need a lot of power.
Power and endurance.
Yeah. The power is where you have the ability to deliver very high voltage energy.
Like a rugby.
Like rugby, like long distance running, like boxing. Endurance is where you need a lot of stamina.
True.
Okay, so power and stamina could be different.
Cool.
So the second copy is endurance, which folks in basketball have, in tennis have.
Right.
And the third copy, which is in vast majority of others, is the mixed variant, which means they are a combination of power and endurance.
They'll be our golfers.
They'll be golfers.
It's interesting that this exists in our country, and I got to know of it as well myself today when I ended up chatting with you offline. So how have you gone about to make this more known amongst the normal civilian in the country?
A healthcare company has a certain limitation of its ethical makeup.
Right.
That we don't advertise so openly and so overtly. So what we did was we went to all major schools in India that have a special sports program. For instance, the Army Public Schools or the Motilal Nehru School of Sports in suburbs of Delhi. There are schools that actually give sporting scholarships to the students so that they excel in their leagues, etc.
Right.
And the traction was immense. And as parents learned about it, many parents came on their own and actually found that their child was, they were pushing the child into a wrong sport.
You said they were at attractive prices as well. So what would be the price range if I want to get a test done like
this is priced very attractively, just at about 2,000 rupees. And it's a very simple blood test, doesn't involve any pain. And we have specially trained pediatric phlebotomists. Phlebotomists are the people who draw blood, who do it so nicely and soothingly that children don't even know that they've been tested.
Lovely. On that note, it's time now for me to tee off, and
Please.
We will continue with our game.
Very good shot.
Thank you so much. Now, several indicators have gone to prove that with every 10% rise in per capita GDP, you are seeing a 2% increase in life expectancy as well. How true is that statement?
That is true, both with the empirical data that's become available since the Second World War. We've seen nations bring up their life expectancy from high 50s to high 80s. From 40s to 60s. Even in India, we've seen a significant increase in life expectancy. And the reason is very simple. There has to be a reason for termination of life. Okay, if one is lucky not to meet with any traumatic accident, it's usually a disease. And if there is ability to fend the disease off, either through a preventive mechanism or curative mechanism, then you're making that person have an economically productive, longer life.
Right.
So if I'm economically productive for a longer span of life, I'm contributing to the GDP. And in fact, It remains to be seen whether this is ad infinitum possible, but surely with the expectancy of life that we have in high 80s in some of the countries, including Japan and Western Europe, we are seeing a steady increase in the per capita income as well.
On technological innovation at SRL, you all are constantly in the endeavor to innovate technologically to be able to match up to the world global standards of diagnostics. Tell us more about that.
On human body, it's possible to do, and you may be surprised, around 4,500 tests. So they relate to different body organs, they relate to different systems, they relate to different limbs and situations. Of the 4,500 tests that are possible on human body, SRL actually does nearly all of them. And the reason is, when a patient comes to you for investigation, a diagnostic lab or diagnostic company has the moral responsibility to make available to the doctor, the physician, and the patient correct and accurate information. So we have a dedicated research and development section. We're the only ones in India to have that. In fact, not many diagnostic companies in the world invest in R&D. It's the equipment makers who invest in R&D.
Yeah.
So we are among the very few in the world that have a dedicated, very trained scientific, medically trained scientific manpower that focuses on this. And that is the reason, Chaiti, we are able to bring a large number of tests at very affordable prices in India.
Now, the diagnostic services market still continues to remain fragmented. We see a lack of standardization procedures and accreditations as well. How do companies like yours tackle a situation like this?
Let me shock you with a number first. India, it's believed, has 50,000 labs. First of all, nobody knows because you don't need any approval to set up a lab in this country. And less than 350 are accredited by the national agency. Large public sector labs are also not accredited. Now, what accreditation means is that every morning you are testing that your equipment is reporting correct results.
But that's a voluntary accreditation, isn't it?
It is unfortunately voluntary accreditation.
But how much do companies follow it then?
Well, all the larger organized sector players follow because they have their reputation to guard in terms of quality and the reliability of results. But I think it's time that Government of India wakes up to the reality that leaving such an important activity in healthcare as voluntary is not going to serve the national purpose for long.
Conversation with Dr. Chaudhary, who is the Managing Director of SRL Diagnostics, and we left off in the first segment about talking about the Health Ministry and some norms. Now, while we're at it, Dr. Chaudhary, in fact, in the last budget, the government has given subsidies for preventive health checkups. After that has happened, have you seen any kind of an uptick in people walking into SRL Diagnostics for their
preventive health checks? Yes, we have, but unfortunately not for the reason of subsidies, but for the reasons of people becoming more aware that a stitch in time saves 9.
Right.
And prevention, the cost of prevention is significantly lower than cost of managing a disease. And
prevention, of course, is always better than cure.
Always better than cure. So that's the reason people are coming in. We did a dipstick study. If any of them was there for the reason that the union budget had an announcement that there is a separate allocation of about 5,000 rupees for preventive health check for any tax assessee. But we actually didn't find many who were there for that reason. So I think the reason could be that it hasn't been publicized enough. People don't know about it. The medical allowance on the personal taxation is something that the corporate tax people manage. Employees generally don't know about it. So I think it would be a lot more impactful if the Finance Ministry or Health Ministry were to publicize this, that any money you spent on preventive health has an exemption, and the people should be encouraged to go to...
Do you expect the same out of the new budget which is about to come in?
Hopefully, and it must specify that only accredited, nationally accredited labs have the ability to provide the service, because otherwise we wouldn't know whether malpractices come in, people don't get tests and yet take the allowance for somebody and split it with someone. So.
Now, you mentioned about growing awareness. Of course, one thing is there is a growing awareness. The other thing is indemnity. Because of these reasons, doctors are prescribing tests much more than they used to in the past. and this has been linked in a very negative connotation. It's also been linked with medical malpractices as well. How far is that true? How do you perceive a scenario like that?
Well, I would say that we need to understand the entirety of this context.
Right.
It is true that some malpractices do take place, but it is also true that the disease are deceptively similar today. If you walk into a medical practice and say, I have fever,
right,
you'd be surprised to know there are 450 types of fevers. So how can any physician, just through physical examination and description of the symptoms, decide that this is the line of medication or treatment?
But how do I, as a normal patient, being a common man, come to know whether I'm being a subject and a victim of the medical malpractices, or is this actually true for me? How do I differentiate it when I know nothing about medicine? I'm not a doctor. How do I know that?
Yeah, I think in matters of health, patients walk in with immense faith on the physician or the doctor. And actually, it is the personal scruples and ethical commitment of the doctor that really makes the difference.
Okay.
So if the doctor chooses to compromise integrity and write tests that are not required, rather than use the tests for correct determination of disease, so I think the line is very fine.
So pick your doctor with your due diligence.
Pick your doctor with your due diligence, and where you have faith that the doctor's actually interested in you and not your wallet, is I think the right determination.
Interesting. On that note, let's play a chip shot.
Sure.
Just about missed the bunker.
Good.
In India, there's a concern over over-referral, overpricing. There is no regulation to keep that, or legislation rather, to keep that in check. Whereas in the Western counterparts, we've seen that there is very stringent legislation that keeps overpricing and over-referrals in checks. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think the big difference is that most of the developed countries, the healthcare costs come from insurance.
Right.
And then the insurance sector itself makes sure that the delivery sector, healthcare delivery sector, charges correctly,
right,
fairly,
right,
and in a certain proportion related to the disease. Now, because vast majority of Indians still pay for their personal health care, they find sometimes even a legitimate test as excessive. That why am I being tested so often? You would be surprised to know that per occupied hospital bed in Western world, the minimum number of pathology tests that take place is upwards of 30. More than 30 tests per day per patient. The reason is not that you're fond of drawing blood and testing, but you're also checking the efficacy of the treatment.
Right.
What is called pharmacogenomics.
Right.
So here people resist because for every test they have to pay.
Yeah.
And because there is no form of health insurance, and it lends itself to malpractices.
Exactly.
But again, I would say that becoming a doctor is probably one of the most difficult academic achievements that anyone can have, although chartered accountants may differ with that. But having spent so much of your life and effort in learning about human body, about healthcare, there are some that of course fall prey to malpractices. But I would say that most doctors that we meet, at least 100,000 doctors that we serve in a company out of a total population of 700,000 doctors in the country, are ethical and do things correctly.
All right, so Dr. Chaudhary, do we have any kind of a competitive cost advantage over the Western counterparts in India?
In diagnostics, the difference is nearly not as much as you would see in surgical procedures, where the difference is of a very large factor. And the reason is that the reagents and consumables and kits that are used in diagnostics are very largely manufactured in the Western world.
Right.
And so therefore they're imported.
Right.
And top of that, Indian service providers have to pay import duty.
Right.
So the raw material cost, if any, is a little bit higher than the Western world. Now, what is lower is the manpower cost or the human cost.
Right.
But the human cost in diagnostics typically is between 25 and 40%, depending on the level of sophistication, technological advancement that a lab would use. So therefore, yes, we are cheaper, but because we work on much lower margins, and we have cheaper human resource costs. But again, I think there is scope for improving that to make the quality diagnostics more affordable. And just as the finance ministry actually has significant tax breaks or zero taxes for essential life-saving medicines and drugs, the reagents used in pathology should be treated as life-saving.
Right.
Because what is it that they don't do that any life-saving drug does?
True.
So I'm really hoping in this budget, the Union Finance Minister actually recognizes the importance of the ingredients that go into quality diagnostics.
Now you have over 250 centers in the country. You're in expansion mode. You have also ended up pioneering a lot of these tests like food intolerance tests, whether it was the breast cancer test. What next for you as a company? What next for SRL?
SRL is clearly focused on its leadership position, which is both geographic and a moral responsibility. The geographic responsibility clearly is that if we have a certain capability to deliver quality diagnostic services, then we should make those services available through the country. We are a large nation. We're happy to share that we actually have the ability to bring in sample from any part of the country into an operating laboratory within 6 hours.
Right.
So that's a huge logistic setup that we have created, but a lot remains to be done. So we want to be everywhere in the country to offer the ability of our test menu to the patients and the doctors. And from a scientific standpoint, we have to be at the cutting edge. We have to make sure that, you see, the diseases are common, whether they happen in United States or Europe or in India. And for a lot of people, affordability of getting treatment done in United States or Europe is not there. In fact, it's the reverse that is happening now. So that can only happen if we are able to offer those tests. So we have to find a way to make them affordable, to have an engagement with the physician community that they know about these tests. Because if I have a test available in my lab, and if the referring physician doesn't know about it, it is no good.
True.
So we have to invest in continuous medical education, into increasing physician awareness.
We all love sport. Sport is a great leveler. Sport is also good for the mind, body and soul. And of course, Dr. Chaudhary, your family is also taken to golf now.
Yes, my wife started. She is a nutrigenomics expert, so she probably understands the link between food, fitness and genes better than the rest of the family. And I think by the sheer location, son in Boston and daughter in London are in two of the great golfing locations in the world, so they are excited to be a part of the game.
Take on to this game as well. Now, I read somewhere that your life expectancy increases by 5 years, and there's a 40% of lesser chance of you getting a cardiac arrest if you are a golfer. How far is that true in your opinion as a doctor?
There is some data to suggest that golfers who regularly play and are able to keep their mind free while playing do tend to live longer, for a simple reason that the mind is relaxed, you're very focused, you're very concentrated, and you have the best of ambience to breathe in for the time that you're on the course. But again, like everything else, if one has to make an exception for people who get agitated on golf course for whatever reason. I think this is a game to be enjoyed. This is a game to let the fullness of human life blossom, and that's when you will live longer.
I think it makes you a little more calm as well as an individual, isn't it?
It does, because it's very meditative.
Yeah.
When you're playing golf, all you're noticing, all your entire attention, like Arjuna was only watching the eye of the fish. So here it's the ball that takes all of your attention, and you can't hit the ball correctly if you're thinking of anything else.
Interesting. Now, also that same report has told me that golfers with the lowest handicap are the safest. So what's your handicap now?
I would probably not fall in a very safe category. I have moved up to 16 after reviving my regularity. But sure, I think the lower handicap would suggest that you're very focused. And if you're very focused and playing a lot in green ambience, you would live longer.
Golf is a way of life.
It is, indeed.
Isn't it?
It indeed
All
is.
right, time now for us to putt and finish our game.
Sure.
Come.
Good.
All right, so any new corporate golf challenges that you are likely to participate in?
My interest has always been in combining golf with fundraising, charities. So I essentially participate in events or sponsor events where the focus is on raising funds for good causes.
Interesting.
So we recently did something for schools in Tamil Nadu.
Right.
And whenever any fundraiser happens, that's my first priority for golf.
All right, on that note, thank you so much for joining us today on Tea Time. Indeed, a pleasure and a privilege to have you on the show.